Good morning, leaders, friends, and colleagues. My name is Kevin Daniel with Fired Up Consulting Group. And today we are talking about successfully navigating difficult dialogue, having those tough conversations, and coming out on the other end being very successful. And today I have invited two amazing professionals that have been there, done that. So I'm just excited to introduce them. I'm going to share my screen here and get this party started. So again, we are grateful for our panel. We have two seasoned professionals that are with us today. So again, the topic is successfully navigating difficult dialogue and tough conversations. And to open up with, I just want to remind you that avoiding difficult conversations is not a strategy, friends and colleagues. It is a recipe, and it is a recipe for disaster, and it is a recipe for things getting worse down the road and getting a lot more people involved. So our panel today is Dr. Marlie Williams and Dr. Tim Dilg. And we're going to give the floor to Dr. Williams. Dr. Williams, who are you? What do you do? What have you done? We'd love to hear from you.
Well, good morning. I am a retired building and district administrator. I spent 25 years in public education, was an English teacher, a high school principal, and an assistant superintendent of academic services. After retirement, I have worked in higher ed as an adjunct professor and then done a variety of other things and just really enjoying that variety. So I look forward to talking with you today, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Williams. We appreciate you. And if I am correct, and I believe we are, given our pre-conference segment, you are a recently certified executive coach now. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Tim Dilg, who are you? What have you done? What are you currently doing? Hello, Dr. Dilg.
Hey, Dr. Daniel, thanks for having me. Tim Dilg, proud superintendent of the Valley Park School District, beginning my 6th year here in the Valley Park School District, located in beautiful St. Louis County. Been an educator for over 20 years, the majority of those, I think 18 now, in the administrative role. First is two different high school principals, then an assistant superintendent of human resources before transitioning into the superintendent role 6 years ago here in Valley Park. I'm also an executive coach with Fired Up Consulting. I do a lot of strategic plan work and continuous school improvement work across the state of Missouri. And I've been an adjunct professor in school administration and curriculum for nearly 15 years for Southwest Baptist University. In my free time, I enjoy hanging out with great educators like Kevin and Marlie and hanging out with my daughter and my wife, who bring me a lot of joy and passion.
So, Dr. Dilge, you recently had a great event in your life. Tell us just momentarily here about the state championship your daughter was involved in.
Yeah, very exciting. My daughter is an aspiring soccer star who loves her high school very much, Coriezu High School here in St. Louis. They were fortunate to make it back to the Final Four for the first time in well over a decade. And thanks to Kevin and his flexibility, I was able to be present to watch them claim their first state championship in girls soccer in a very long time, just over a week or so ago. So thanks, Kevin, for the opportunity to be there and for the shout out, and congratulations to the Chargers.
Hey, go Chargers, baby. I love it, man. Hey, in 10 years, that's what you will remember.
That's right.
So love it, man. All right. Well, we are going to get into our conversation today. And I want to go back. There's Dr. Williams' slide. There's Dr. Tim Dilg's slide. And now my task today is really moderate and facilitate these questions. So you guys can debate who wants to go first. I've been queuing Marlie up first each time, so you guys can trade off. But our first question today, as we think about the topic, tough conversations, hard conversations. Question number one, what do you believe are the keys in successfully navigating difficult dialogue?
Well, I'll take the initial response on this one,
Right.
Tim, if it's okay. Well, I would just offer to begin this conversation, it is important not to avoid. I think people are seeking leadership and coaching in most situations, and if you aren't the one providing it, they're going to seek and receive it from someone else around them, from whomever steps up and provides it. So if you think about those who need the coaching, are they getting advice from the best sources, or should you be the one who has the conversation, provides the correction, the coaching, whatever supervision is needed, and has that conversation with them? So don't avoid. Be diplomatic, be calm, and be objective, be fair, and ask good questions. I think those are all keys. Come in and have the conversation in a way that leads to openness and creates a space where you can actually drive to some improvement, drive to that win-win if possible. Sometimes it is about making a correction. Other times it's about coaching, but you have to know what the goal is when you begin the conversation.
Excellent. Marlie, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate your comment about being diplomatic. That is certainly a skill set you possess and that I have observed from you over the years. So yeah, Tim, over to you, sir.
Yeah, so great suggestions there from Marlie. Some of the things that I always think are really important key skills when navigating these difficult dialogues. First and foremost, preparation, right? Like anything in life, we need to plan for success. We need to anticipate, what we want the outcome to be following the conversation. We need to make sure we've done our research and our practice. I do encourage people to practice and script out opening sentences, key questions they want to ask, key findings they hope to have answered by the end of these difficult conversations. I echo so much what Marlie said. I feel like patience, poise, and presence are really important in these difficult conversations. The people we're interacting with, again, these are difficult conversations. The people we're interacting with, they will model what we model. They will mirror what we model. And so if we escalate it with anger or voice or different things, they're likely to mirror that. And on the flip side, the positive side of that, if we can keep poise, keep calm, keep a steady tone and demeanor throughout the conversation, they will also mirror that, and it will make the conversation go that much more successful. And then finally is that openness piece. If you come in with a predetermined outcome of what you want the conversation to be like and go like, or if you come in with a mindset that it's going to be challenging or difficult or these things are going to happen, then that's likely going to come to fulfillment. So be open to where the conversation wants you to go and allows you to go, while also being prepared for some possible challenges along the way and knowing and purposeful about where you do need to get by the time the conversation is over.
Thank you, Tim. I really appreciate those answers. Friends and colleagues, you obviously are beginning to get a sense on why I reached out. The two doctors on the call today, great advice and very keen from your experiences, counsel. Tim, we're going to have you go first on this one. Question number 2 of our 5 questions today of navigating difficult dialogue. Tim, when do you know it's time to have a hard conversation? And the follow-up is like, what are the keys for you in deciding to go there?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, it is a little bit of human instinct, for lack of a better term, gut. But it also really centers around what are your values, particularly as a leader, but also as a person. And one of the things I value most, both individually, but that I always hope to give back to others, is I want to grow them to be the very best person that they can be, both as a human, but also as an employee or an educator in my circumstances. And so with that mindset in mind, I always tend to react sooner rather than later, because delaying is almost certainly going to guarantee that what is ever difficult now is going to be exponentially more difficult if we delay those conversations. So that's first and foremost for me. I'm always action oriented. So when I see that myself or my team is not meeting expectations, but on a path to potentially not meeting key metrics or goals of our districts, again, much better for everyone involved, myself, the other people involved, to have a conversation early about what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, or what I'm not seeing, so that we can reset that course and do something actionable to get back on track. And that goes to that growth mindset of trying to help individuals as well. Right? Again, if the only outcome we're ever looking for is termination or departing from a relationship or something like that, well, then that's what we're going to get. If we come in with a growth mindset of how can I help others be the best version of themselves, and go with that approach, you're more likely to respond quicker and actually have a more positive result in the end.
Yeah, I love that. I love your attitude about the critical piece of mindset and showing up with a heart to grow others and develop them. Yeah, very, very much appreciated. Dr. Williams, over to you.
Well, I think everything Tim said is true, and that goes to Maxwell's level 5 leadership. And level 5 leaders grow people to their potential, and I think that really encapsulates having expectations, but also having relationships. And when you have built trust and relationships with the people that you're working with, you can do all of those things that Tim's talked about. You're proactive. You have established expectations. You are looking for those checkpoints. And if we're not hitting them, then we can have the conversation so that we're able to work together to grow toward everyone's greatest potential. And that's part of it. The other thing that I've said to people that I'm working with in terms of mentoring or coaching is, if you don't address something, you're either endorsing or condoning that action or that behavior. And while you may not stand with a microphone in your hand and endorse or condone the action or behavior, not standing with the microphone in your hand and not addressing it does the very same thing. It speaks volumes. So if that is something you want everyone in the organization to engage in and do, come to work late, not to do X, Y, or Z, then don't address it. Don't do that. That should give you pause and say, okay, well, then I really do need to be proactive rather than reactive. And really, what Tim said, early rather than late is always better, because breaking habits is harder than changing action before they become habits. And I think that is the key.
Yeah, well said, Dr. Williams. Yeah, I think what you're hearing here, ladies and gentlemen, is you're hearing timing and context matter. Timing and context matter. You're hearing the foundational piece of relationships being laid. That trust is being built every day that ends in the letter Y. Every day we're working on trust and relationships. And when you have to lean into a hard conversation, that pre-work, and I hate to say pre-work, but the preliminary work of relationships and foundation has already been laid in a very positive way. And that's the way leaders need to show up every day, whether you're thinking about difficult conversations or not. So, yeah, great answers. Let's go back to the screen here, and we'll go to question number 3. Dr. Williams, we'll let you go with this one. So, Marlie, where do you have the conversation, and what is your role in leading it? And then maybe the next phase of that, and we can certainly go back, what are your pro tips for being successful during the conversation? Again, where do you have the conversation?
Well, and I think Tim will probably agree when he comes comes in on this one. I think it depends where you have the conversation on the situation and how many times you've had the conversation or a conversation with the person previously. I think planning does matter. So if it is a conversation that is a first or second conversation with a person that isn't a serious violation of policy or a serious investigative matter, then you have it in their space. Because I do think that relaxes some of the defensiveness that's involved. But you still come in with a plan and have the conversation. But you make sure that the space is still private and you can help the person maintain their dignity. If it is a more serious conversation, or you have escalated in terms of the number of times you've had a conversation with the person and things just aren't correcting, then you have the conversation in the office space or the building office, the district office, in a more formal space. And the pro tips I would offer would be, have a plan. I used to like to use a paper plan, because I think in our age of technology, it's easy to have something on the computer, and there's nothing wrong with having your computer screen up and being a note taker on the computer screen, but having something in front of you on paper is oftentimes comforting for the other person too, so they can see that, this is what we're going to talk about. There's this situation here. This is what I understand the facts to be. This is what I want you to share more information about. And this is, we're going to develop a plan here, or whatever situation, may entail. And then I take notes. I always take notes, and I would read the notes back to the person. That shares that I'm listening, and I'm listening intently. That builds trust, it builds empathy, and it also shows that I don't have a predetermination, because I may learn something about the situation that I didn't know before, or I may learn something about the situation that I had incorrect information about when the conversation started, so that I'm open to, the realities of wherever the conversation has taken us. Sometimes you need a witness. And if that happens, if it's a situation that is serious enough that you need a witness, I begin that conversation with, this person is here as a witness. They are not a participant. They are note-taking, and those notes will be provided in copy to you at the end of this meeting. Just so they know that there is a third party in the room. They are not a participant. They are taking notes, and those notes are not secret, but in the interest of openness, you'll also receive a copy. I think sometimes having a conversation about a serious situation warrants a witness, and it also warrants an additional set of notes besides your own.
Yeah, thank you for that. Marlie, one follow-up to that. In this day and age of lack of engagement, lack of focus, lots of distractions, what is one thing that you do that really helps you focus and not be distracted by all the things that could distract one in a conversation in today's world?
Well, my phone is always turned upside down, so I can't see the screen. I don't know if you can hear the dings. I can't see any notifications. I haven't figured out how to turn the sound notification off. If I've spent more time on that prior to this recording, I would have done that. But I don't see any of the text part of the notifications come up. I also just know that is, so you just heard that one, right?
Yes.
But nothing text, no text comes over. I also make sure that that's protected time, and that I'm dedicating my mental space to the task that I have allotted that time to. So, that I think that's a skill that we have to work on in the age of multitasking, because that's not really possible. No one can really multitask. Our brains can focus on one thing at a time, and sometimes not even very well, one thing at a time. So we just really have to attend.
Yeah, I appreciate that word, attend. it's really honoring and valuing and attending to the people right in front of us. So yeah, thank you for that, Marlie.
One more thing I would just offer, I forgot to say this, and maybe Tim will expand on it. We cannot give medical or legal advice. That's not our role. And sometimes people want us to, and you just have to avoid that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's some stage advice that will keep you out of court and lose. Sometimes you end up in court, but you want to win if you have to go to court. All right, yeah, well said, Marlie. Tim, where and any pro tips?
Yeah, well, pro tip number one, I take good notes when Marlie talks because she's got a lot of really good ideas that I think can help all of us. So that's pro tip number one. I would echo that where you have the conversation and the tone and delivery of the conversation, it is somewhat dependent on both the severity and urgency of the situation that we're discussing. Obviously, some things, to Marlie's point, they can have multiple conversations, first, second, third conversations. Unfortunately, in all of our industries, there are conversations that sometimes can only be once or twice and require. So that severity and urgency will drive a lot about where you have that conversation. And then also echoing Marlie as well, it's also a little bit not only severity and urgency, but what is your level of relationship with the individual that you're having it with, right? If I've been working with a peer and we've been having honest, clear, direct conversations for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, well, those conversations may take, place in different places and have different tones and may occur with greater frequency than someone I've only been supervising or working with for a month or a year, right? All of those different things. So there's a quantity of things that come into play when we're trying to have those conversations. Some key tips that I think are just crucial in all of these conversations. First and foremost, again, what is your purpose of having the meeting? And that's important not only for you to predetermine before the meeting, but to share with the individual when you're having that meeting with them, regardless of the time and space that it's occurring. Why are we meeting? What is my concern? What is the urgency? What is the severability? Second, inquiry. We mentioned openness earlier. What are some open, honest questions that I need to ask in this conversation so that I have some more answers and more information to make a really critical and informed decision? And that decision, this is really important, does not always have to happen in the meeting. In fact, I would urge people not to have a predetermined decision before any of these meetings, and B, do not feel constrained to time that you have to make a decision within that meeting. Much better to take some time, process what you heard, maybe perhaps follow up with that individual and or others to collect more information before making a really important decision that could impact someone's career, their home, or their personal life. I do think 3 other things that I think are critically important: acknowledgement. So you do need to acknowledge the severity or the concern, and also acknowledge openly with that individual what they're about to hear, or some of the questions that they're about to be asked may be difficult to hear, may evoke some emotions or some feelings of uncomfortability. But let's be honest and put that out there right in front so that we can kind of have a good conversation about that, right? And with that, then with that acknowledgement comes advocacy. So acknowledge and advocate, what is your role in this conversation? Am I a fact finder? Am I here to grow you, to coach you, to find out what resources you need to be more successful, to provide resources to redirect and correct a course of action? What is my role as an advocate in this conversation? And then finally, and Marlie hit on this, action steps. So at the end of the meeting, what will occur now? Maybe I need to circle back to Kevin. Kevin, thanks for meeting with me. I need some time to process and look into this a little further. I assure you, you'll hear from me one way or the other in the next 48 hours, 72 hours, end of the week, whatever it may be. What's the follow-up? What did we agree to in those action steps? What am I going to do following this meeting? What are you going to do following this meeting, so that we are partners in this dialogue and conversation? And then to Marlie's point, I think regardless of the severity, every conversation needs some type of follow-up documentation. Now, that sometimes can be as very simple as a short email. Kevin, thanks for meeting with me today. to discuss how we're going to supervise recess better. Great. Sometimes, based on that severability and urgency, it's a much more formal, documented letter, email, signatures, and that'll range based on that severity and urgency, but there has to be some type of follow-up. The number one challenge that I see with a lot of newer administration and supervisors is documentation. So many times as superintendent, I will have administrators come to me and say, I've got this big problem, and their first response is they want to act in regards of something severe such as termination. And one of the very first questions I ask is, have you spoken to the employee about this before? Have you spoken with the student about their behavior before? Have you communicated with their parents? And even if they say yes, one of my follow-up questions is, where is the documentation? Because without that documentation, even if it is as short, Kevin, thanks for meeting with me about how we're supervising recess. Without that documentation, it becomes he said, she said, and quite frankly, it never occurred. And if I'm sitting across from an employee and they're saying, this is the first time I'm ever hearing about this, Tim, well, that puts me in a really difficult position as a leader. So I want to be able to say to that employee, well, that's not true, Kevin. We talked about it in October. We followed up in November. Here we are having a third conversation, right? So documentation, follow-up, action steps are also equally important.
Wow. As we're going through this dialogue today, I'm just reminded of how much is involved and how important it is to go in with a plan, to be agile, even though you're going in with a plan. What did Rocky say? Everyone has a plan until they get busted in the mouth. Sometimes things don't go as planned, but I'm definitely hearing going in with a plan is really important. Again, I hearken back to timing and context matter. I'll never forget in the year 2000, we were getting ready to ask a coach to, leave the premises. He was having some inappropriate relationships with some of the girls' basketball team, one particular. And that was a conversation where we were behind our desks and we were in a very, very much a position of authority. We had the home court advantage, and give us your keys, we're escorting you out. Again, the place where you have events and in meetings like this, and the context and all of the things that you've heard really drive the what, the where, and the how. So important. All right, well, let's move along in our conversation. Wow, just so impressed with the expertise that we have here today. And I'm here too. All right. Question number 4. Who's up here? Is this Tim? Is this you?
I think I can lead off on this one.
All right, Tim. So to the extent you can, describe some tough conversations. I certainly gave an example of one that wasn't much fun, very divisive in our community at that time. But to the extent you can, describe some tough conversations or situations that led to tough conversations maybe you have encountered over the years.
Yeah, I guess unfortunately, I've had to encounter a number of these difficult and tough conversations over the years. And I think instinctually, a lot of us go to the termination type of hearings that you've heard, because again, I've always tried to stress, particularly during my time in human resources, that our goal is to really put the human into these conversations. And so I always try to frame that, no matter how difficult the conversation is that there's always a person across from me that's involved and is going to be impacted by this. And ultimately, my decisions may impact many more people based on the decision that I'm going to make. So rather though than focus on a termination one, I think, unfortunately, again, too many times I've had to communicate to people or groups of people about the various losses of students. Any loss of life is always very difficult. It's certainly more manageable when we think of adults and having full lives and end of lives, but certainly much more difficult when we're talking about children. And no longer seeing those children in our hallways, in our classrooms, or our baseball teams, or whatever it may be. And I'll never forget one of the most difficult losses I had to communicate was actually to one of my assistant principals in my second principalship. I had been on the job maybe about 3 weeks. We had started the school year maybe a week or two prior. So I was very new to the community, having relocated from Southwest Missouri back home to St. Louis. I had not had much time to establish deep relationships with anyone, certainly my admin team. And I had to deliver some really difficult news to our assistant principal, who was also an alumni of the high school, who was also our head baseball coach, well respected, that we essentially had received news that one of our students, through no fault of his own, lost his life because of a reckless driver the previous night before. And in addition to delivering that news, that difficult news, I'm not going to say I was unprepared, but I was certainly ill-equipped to really, I didn't know, maybe I was unprepared. I didn't think it through enough about how the adult across from me was going to respond. I felt even years later, I've apologized to him since, I felt ill-equipped to respond to his emotional needs and feelings because of my mind. I had a mindset that this was a strong adult, male, highly successful teacher, coach, person, and I forgot, about the toll that loss of life can take on any of us. And so I was ill-equipped to do that. Certainly, I've had to give those messages or deliver those messages equally difficult to whole student bodies. And it never, I will tell you this, those type of conversations never get easier. There is very little amount of practice that can ever make you, quote, an expert in those type of conversations. And if I've learned anything from the amount of times I've had to deliver messages on loss of life, whether it's a staff member that goes suddenly or a student in some of these many cases, the one thing I've learned is humility is extremely important. And I think it's equally important for the person delivering that message to also acknowledge what they're feeling, whether it's hurt or fear, loss of words. And if I have gotten better, and I don't know if I ever want to get better at those conversations, but if I have gotten better, it is that acknowledgement piece of just being my true, honest, open self in front of those people and saying, I don't know how to deliver this message. I'm ill-equipped to do so. Here are all the things I'm feeling, thinking, and to lean in to the hurt a little bit and to say, I'm hurting. I know you're hurting. I don't have answers, but I'm willing to sit with you and find those answers. I'm willing to work with you to get through this together. And while I don't know what the path looks like at the end, I know that we're stronger together and that we can find ways together. So those are probably the most difficult ones for me. Certainly all the human resources things I've had to deal with in my 20 plus years in education are difficult, but to me, those are on a whole nother spectrum of difficulty.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I would agree and echo everything you just said. Marlie, question 4 here, to the extent you want to, you feel free to describe some tough conversations, give us some examples. Thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, wow, that just brought up a whole lot of situations, that those are hard ones, staff and student loss. And yeah, I don't think you ever do become expert on that. And it's never easy. So Tim, thank you for that. I'll also avoid termination situations just because I think that we learn a lot about those situations and we have a lot of resources for those. I don't know that I was ever really mentored or coached on some of these others. And I don't know that I ever imagined having to have a conversation with a teacher about dress code. That was a new and interesting one for me. Just have to be very frank and forthright and respectful and help the teacher retain their dignity. But you have to be assertive, and that's different than aggressive, but you have to be assertive in those conversations and maintain expectations that you would maintain for students and other staff members in that situation. I think difficult situations include when you have two staff members who are married who then end up going through a divorce in your building. Those are challenging situations because divorce also often involves friends and some sort of choosing of sides and helping people navigate all of the emotion that goes through the loss of a relationship is challenging. And if you're in a small district or school building, that can be even more difficult. I was fortunate that the building I worked in was quite large. So, in terms of geographic size, we had a little more latitude that way. When you have a student in your building who is the child of a staff member who's in conflict with another staff member, that's challenging. I think we've all dealt with those, the three of us in this situation have dealt with a staff member who's excessively using leave. And how do you handle that? That several staff members have accrued or banked a lot of leave time, but in no situation is using excessive numbers of leave days good for students. So how do you handle that? And I think you have to look at the situation. Is it a situation where the staff member has a chronically ill child, a chronically ill spouse, or a chronic illness themselves? That's one thing. And you help them navigate the illness and all of the things surrounding that. On the other hand, I had to navigate a couple of situations where the staff member wasn't ill. They didn't have anyone in their family ill, and they were just using days. And you could almost predict on a calendar which days of the week it would be.
Monday, Friday?
Yes. And then when Mondays and Fridays were called out, then it became other days of the week. So, when teachers are missing 14, 15, 16, 22 days out of the year, there are policies about that. You have to rely on policy. You have to have the conversation. You begin that graduated supervision process and escalate the significance of the conversations, always documenting. But you have assertive, I like to use the word assertive conversations, and those are appropriate in leadership, and you are ultimately responsible for the things that are happening in the building and for the education of the students. So the well-being of the staff and students in the building is dependent upon all of the staff members pulling their weight. And when we can't find substitutes and other people are scrambling to cover and not being able to fulfill their own responsibilities, more than just that person's students are suffering in their absence. So, it becomes a big situation.
Yeah, absolutely. To follow up, one of the more difficult spaces to lead in is when you want to have high morale for staff. You want staff to feel good, and at the end of the day, we are in the school world, we are in the student being successful business. And one of the areas that I found very, very difficult to trudge through was doing things that were really in the best interest of students that would be hard for adults, and receiving that pushback from adults. Oftentimes in administration and leadership, you do not get a chance to tell all of your side of the story. You are bound by certain confidentiality. You're bound by legalities. And I have personally found that is tough when you are bound to confidentiality and 75 people are out there talking about something with only the tip of the iceberg of information. And guys, ladies, gentlemen, that's leadership. Welcome to it. It's varsity. This ain't JV. This is varsity when you're in leadership. So welcome to the big time. All right, our final question of the day, as we reach an amazing conclusion from just a conversation that most of us did not receive a lot of formal training on, but the School of Hard Knocks is a pretty good school. So we've all been through it, and there's no real preparation for this. We're hoping you're finding this beneficial as you grow as a leader. Question number 5, when a hard conversation goes south, it goes off the rails and just is not going the way you had anticipated, it's going really poorly or badly, what would be some sage advice as we conclude our conversation? Marlie, you want to go first on this one?
Sure. When conversations start to go south, and they sometimes do, it's okay sometimes to pause, acknowledge that you recognize there's a lot of emotion involved in the conversation you're having, in the situation that you're talking about, and let's just take a 5-minute break to go grab a bottle of water and take a deep breath before we continue the conversation. If it is a meeting that you think needs more than 5 minutes, sometimes you just need to say, okay, let's come back tomorrow and reconvene. I never like to do that. And I would say that's a very rare instance when that needs to happen. But just saying, okay, I recognize that, there's a lot of emotion involved, and this is an emotional topic. I understand that. But my goal here is for the situation to, for me to learn more about the situation, really, and to hear your side. I need to learn more. And if you just restate that, sometimes that is helpful. Another thing is have boundaries and be clear about them. If it's going south because the other person is screaming and cursing and demeaning you, be clear about your boundaries. And in the very calmest but firmest voice you have, just say, look, I have not cursed at you. I'm not going to curse at you. But if you continue to curse at me, this meeting will be over, and we'll come back together at a time when you are able to control your emotions. If you think we can continue now, we'll do that. And sometimes that's enough to bring them into the moment.
Yep.
Other times it's not. But boundaries are important. Your assertiveness is important. I never raised my voice, and sometimes even lowering my volume helped, because they have to then lower theirs to hear me, because they, wanted to know what to be mad about me saying the next thing. And I don't say that to be facetious. It just is a strategy, that is human psychology. When people are at an escalated volume, you lower yours. You offer them a bottle of water. That's a moment to pause and say, let me read back to you my notes. And you put them into listening frame instead of speaking frame. You restate your goal, those kinds of things. That's a hard place. The emotion is high. And sometimes you do have to stop, pause for a few minutes, pause and reschedule. And sometimes the reschedule means that you have to have someone else present with you. You have to consider safety, all of those things.
Yeah, no, great stuff right there. The other thing, and we're not getting into this a lot today, but sometimes we don't get to schedule hard conversations. Sometimes they are
they walk in.
they are thrust upon us in a moment's notice. And I think, Marlie, your advice there, one person's got to be calm in a difficult situation, and it better be us. What's the old cliche? The first task in managing difficult people or difficult situations is first managing yourself. So keeping your tone low, lowering it, as you've alluded to, because again, sometimes you're in the middle of a crowd, and sometimes people will show up looking for a fight in public, and you're right in the middle of it, and you're in de-escalation mode versus, you've been able to stage this, you've got the seating and all that. So yeah, Marley, good stuff there. Tim, close us out here, there, Doctor. When it goes south, when it goes off the rails, what say ye, sir?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I thought Marley's suggestion about establishing or reestablishing norms and behaviors is brilliant. We tend to do that when we're leading different teams or groups or facilitating professional development, but I don't know that we often think about that enough, whether we say it enough during these conversations. And so sometimes you do have to be very open and transparent about what behaviors are or are not acceptable and what will or will not be tolerated. So that is excellent advice. And even though in many of these conversation pieces today, we've talked about leading or facilitating these conversations, sometimes, for lack of a better term, the opponent, and there will be opponents across from us from time to time, look, they also are aware of human psychology and behaviors and different things. And many of them, typically in a defensive state, will also try to trigger us. And so again, to your point, Kevin, and to Marley's, knowing oneself is probably equally as important as who we're going to be meeting with as well, because there will be opportunities for the most difficult conversations we have where they will try to trigger us into responding. And so I use kind of the metaphor BLT, right? So B standing for breathe, or to Marley's point, to pause. Sometimes I think that's important for two reasons. One, when our opponent or the person across from us is escalating and trying to get us off track, really important to pause and breathe. Sometimes when we feel we're starting to get an emotional response to what the person is saying, or we feel like we're now being attacked or put on the defensive, really important to pause, breathe, right? Remember why we're here and that you called the meeting, you facilitated it. This is not about you. It's about the situation that we're trying to address here. So breathe is the first part of that BLT. The second part, I would never put double lettuce on a BLT, but I do listen and learn. So we have to reframe to the people that we're speaking with that our purpose today is to do two things. It's to listen, and we're going to do that through some open-ended questions, and to learn, because we have to make a decision or move a certain direction. And rather than doing that in isolation, we're providing them an opportunity to give us more information so that we can listen, learn. And so sometimes we have to bring back, Kevin, I know you're upset. Marley, I know, this is difficult and uncomfortable, but let's pause for a second and remember why we're here, right? If you can, share what the outcome, your potential outcome is at the end of the day. I'm just here to have a conversation. So at the end of the day, I have more information to make an informed decision before moving forward, right? A simple reframing. So BLT, breathe, listen, learn, and then talk again, right? And too often in any of these difficult conversations, I think we flip that and we want to put the T first. We just want to talk. And that really kind of escalates those behaviors, those difficulties and so things. So breathe, listen, learn, then talk, right? And when you think about it, going all the way back to the breathing part being the first, and I would contend most important part, think about the conversations you've had with a partner, a spouse, a child that has really, quite frankly, resulted in nothing positive, right? Where we both leave the conversation feeling hurt and angrier than we went in, and nothing successful, and it's going to stew with us for the rest of the day or evening or whatever. What do those conversations look like, right? It's usually a lot of rapid fire, a lot of escalation, heated comments, right? No real thinking or processing before we respond, just trying to make sure that we get the next word in edgewise. If we're engaging in that type of behavior, that's a great trigger for all of us to remind ourselves, oh, BLT. It's time to breathe, time to listen, time to learn, and now then time for me to talk again.
Wow. Fantastic. Great responses today, friends. The last thing I want to share, number one, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I've learned a lot. And, no matter how many difficult conversations you've had, no matter how seasoned you are, there's always something to learn. And my final you know, opportunity here is any concluding thoughts. Marlie, any concluding thoughts? And then I want to leave the conversation and process later.
Sure. I would just say that these conversations are never easy. And even though they're not easy, you shouldn't avoid them, but you do, with experience, gain skill in having them. And I think that skill helps you become better and seek to avoid them less often. So lean on your mentors and don't avoid. They're not easy, but they're necessary.
Well said. Tim?
Yeah, the only other final thoughts I would have is when you can, and given the severity of the situation, try to practice with a mentor, a peer, again, obviously being mindful of confidentiality and all those things. But the more you can practice before going into a very difficult conversation, I think that'll be key to success. And then also don't be afraid in that practice and preparation to have someone role reverse with you. So where you're the person sitting in the opposite seat and you almost try to anticipate some of the questions they may have, some of the feelings, some of the redirects or triggers they might have. That will also help you to be more prepared entering into those conversations. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, it is like riding a bike. The more you do it, the better you get. And so keep in mind, there is no perfect template. There's no perfect system. And I really think a key piece is leaning into the human and humility aspect of all these conversations. Keep the humans first and foremost in your mind, and be humble, have some humility when you're having these conversations.
Okay, very good. Very good. My final slide of the day is the definition of insanity, friends. Insanity is doing what you've always done and expecting a different result. So my sage advice, my wise counsel, just from learning the hard way through my own experiences and frankly, failures, is that if it's not working, adjust the rudder, step back, engage in deep reflection, and just ask the question, what did not go well? And how did I contribute to things not going well? Or how did my behaviors contribute to things going extremely well? What did I do well? And as we know, being a reflective leader is one of the most important things we can do. So again, if it's not going well, as old Dr. Phil says, how's that working for you? Well, if it's not, step back, readjust, and reboot. I want to thank my very special guest today, Dr. Tim Dilg and Dr. Marlie Williams. Great rock star leaders, sage, seasoned professionals, and I encourage you to go through this and practice your skills and listen to the advice of the experts. Fantastic, amazing, amazing things. Thank you for joining us today. This is Kevin Daniel with Fired Up Consulting Group. Have a wonderful day.